I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Take a deep breath and let your mind drift back in time. Can you smell it? That distinct, comforting scent of tatami mats warming in the afternoon sun, mixed with the faint metallic tang of a kerosene heater being prepared for the winter. Or perhaps you can hear the distant, melancholic melody of the neighborhood loudspeaker playing at exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, telling all the children that it was time to run home. Welcome back to a time that feels both like a distant dream and just like yesterday. Today, we are going to journey together through the 1970s and 80s in Japan. We will uncover 20 incredible details of everyday life that we have all somehow completely forgotten. These are not just objects, but the very heartbeat of our youth. And make sure you stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we will share is perhaps the most tender, heartbreakingly beautiful ritual of all, one that will surely bring a tear to your eye. Before we begin our list, let us remember how different the flow of time felt back then. In the Showa era, time was not something we constantly raced against, but rather a quiet companion that walked beside us. We lived in an age of waiting. We waited for a photograph to be developed. We waited for a favorite song to play on the radio. And we waited by a heavy telephone for a promised call. Some people today might think that without modern technology, our lives were somehow poorer or less connected. But you and I know the absolute truth. Life was incredibly rich because of that waiting. It was rich in anticipation, rich in patience, and deeply rich in genuine human connection. We did not stare at glowing screens. We looked into each other's eyes. We shared small, cramped spaces, but our hearts and our communities felt boundless. The world was tactile, full of things we could hold, wind up, polish, and repair. Now, let us gently turn the pages of our shared photo album and step back into that beautifully imperfect, deeply human world. Let us begin with a sound that was the very heartbeat of every morning commute. Do you remember the station attendants standing in their neat uniforms at the ticket gates? Long before automated turnstiles and digital passes, there was a man in a small booth holding a heavy metal ticket puncher. The sound was incredible, a rapid, rhythmic clatter that sounded almost like a musical instrument echoing through the station. You would hand him your tiny, thick cardboard ticket, and with a blur of motion, he would punch a small notch into the edge and hand it back to you in a fraction of a second. Every single station had a differently shaped punch hole, so the conductor always knew where your journey began. During the morning rush hour, the attendants moved so fast it was like watching a master craftsman at work. And at the end of the day, the floor inside their little wooden booth would be covered in a soft blanket of tiny cardboard confetti. It was a brief moment of human contact before you started your busy day, a small exchange of trust that has now vanished completely from our modern stations. Now, let us bring our memories back inside the house, right into the center of the living room during the freezing winter months. Surely you remember the distinct, sharp smell of the kerosene heater, the traditional stove that was the anchor of every household. Getting it ready was a daily ritual. You had to carefully pump the fuel from the red plastic tank, being careful not to spill a single drop on the tatami mats. When you pushed the ignition lever, there was that heavy click, followed by a soft whoosh, as the circular flame roared to life, glowing a deep, comforting orange behind the metal grill. But the best part of the kerosene stove was not just the warmth, it was how we used it. Mothers and grandmothers would place a piece of aluminium foil on the flat top. We would roast sweet potatoes until the skin was blistered and the inside was golden and steaming, or we would toast square pieces of mochi, watching them magically puff up and crack open. The whole family would huddle tightly around that one source of heat, peeling tangerines and watching television together in the cozy, fragrant warmth. I wonder if you can still picture the dusty, magical shelves of the local dagashiya, the neighborhood penny candy store. After school, with a few 10-yen coins jingling heavily in our pockets, this was our ultimate destination. These tiny, cramped shops were usually run by a sweet, wrinkled older woman we all simply called Grandma. The air inside always smelled faintly of sweet soy sauce, bubblegum, and old cardboard. We would spend what felt like hours agonizing over how to spend our tiny fortune. There were those small, round pieces of chewing gum in a cardboard box, where if you found a red mark inside the wrapper, you won a free one. There were the sour plum candies, the dried squid on a stick, and those little whistle candies that we blew into until our mothers told us to stop. The dagashiya was our first lesson in economics, but more importantly, it was a safe haven. It was a place where children could gather away from parents and teachers, sharing secrets and comparing prizes under the warm, watchful eye of the neighborhood shopkeeper. Let us talk about the sheer physical weight of communication in the 1970s. I am talking about the heavy, black, rotary dial telephone sitting proudly in the hallway, or the bright green public payphones on the street corner. Making a phone call back then was a deliberate, almost physical act. You had to stick your finger into the plastic hole and pull the dial all the way around, listening to that satisfying, mechanical whir as it spun back into place. Number by number, you built your connection. And if you were a teenager calling your crush, the anxiety was unbearable. You prayed that their strict father would not be the one picking up the receiver on the other end. Outside, at the green payphones, we would stack our 10-yen coins on top of the machine. During a long conversation, you would hear a warning beep, and you had to frantically shove another coin into the slot before the line abruptly went dead. Telephone cards eventually changed this, but nothing will ever replace the heavy, grounded feeling of holding that chunky plastic handset against your ear. As the seasons turned and the humid Japanese summer arrived, a very specific ritual took place at dusk. Can you envision the ceramic pig sitting on the edge of the wooden porch? This was the holder for the Katori Senko, the green spiral mosquito coil. In the 1970s and 80s, before air conditioning was in every single room, we kept the glass sliding doors wide open to catch the evening breeze. To keep the mosquitoes away, we would strike a match, light the tip of the brittle green coil, and blow it out until it glowed a steady, angry red. The smoke would drift up in lazy, curling ribbons. That earthy, slightly medicinal smell of pyrethrum is the absolute essence of a Showa-era summer. We would sit on the veranda wearing our light cotton yukata, eating chilled watermelon and spitting the black seeds into the garden. The scent of the burning coil, mixed with the sound of thousands of cicadas singing in the trees, created a deeply peaceful, meditative atmosphere that wrapped the entire neighborhood in a shared, smoky embrace. For a child growing up in those decades, there was no place more glamorous or exciting than the rooftop of a major department store. A Sunday outing to places like Mitsukoshi, Matsuzakaya, or Seibu was a major family event. We would dress up in our very best clothes just to go shopping. But for us children, the true paradise was waiting at the very top. You would step out of the elevator into the bright sunlight of the rooftop amusement park. There were small, coin-operated rides, usually in the shape of pandas, elephants, or spaceships, that moved at a painfully slow, gentle pace. There were tiny Ferris wheels and colorful balloon vendors. After spending all our energy running around the concrete roof, the family would go down to the great dining hall. We always ordered the children's lunch, which came served on a plate shaped like a bullet train, complete with a tiny paper flag stuck proudly into the top of a scoop of ketchup-flavored rice. It felt like the height of luxury, a perfect Sunday wrapped in pure, unadulterated joy. Let us take a walk down the evening streets to a place that bound the whole community together, the Sento, or the local public bathhouse. Even if we had a small bath at home, going to the Sento was a cherished weekly treat. You would walk through the sliding wooden doors and pay the attendant sitting high up in the wooden bandai booth. Inside the changing room, there were tall wooden lockers and a large scale you stepped on with wet feet. The bathing room itself was magnificent, usually featuring a giant painted mural of Mount Fuji on the back tile wall. The room echoed endlessly with the sounds of splashing water, the scraping of small wooden stools against the tiled floor, and the loud, echoing conversations of neighbors discussing their day. The water was always incredibly, almost unbearably hot. But the absolute best part of the ritual happened after you dried off. You would put a coin into the glass front refrigerator and buy a bottle of sweet coffee milk or fruit milk. Standing there with one hand on your hip, chugging that ice-cold milk from the glass bottle, was the most refreshing feeling in the world. When winter approached, the entire nation engaged in a beautiful, messy, and creative artistic endeavor. I am talking about the preparation of the New Year's greeting postcards, the Nengajo. In the late 70s and 80s, a miraculous machine called the print gokko entered our homes. It was a small plastic printing press that allowed ordinary families to mass-produce their own colorful postcards. Do you remember the intense flash of the bulb when you burned the master screen? It was so bright it left spots in your vision, and it was followed by a distinct, sharp smell of burning flashbulbs and wet ink. We would spend the entire evening carefully pressing down on the machine, stamping hundreds of cards with images of the coming year's zodiac animal. The freshly printed cards had to be laid out all over the tatami floor to dry, turning the living room into a temporary art gallery. It was a labor of love, a physical manifestation of our desire to stay deeply connected to our friends, relatives, and colleagues as the new year dawned. There was a chore that happened on bright, sunny weekend mornings that I'm sure you remember well. It was the absolute necessity of airing out the thick cotton futons. Houses back then did not have high-tech ventilation or dehumidifiers, so we relied on the power of the sun. Mothers would drape the heavy futons over the metal balcony railings or wooden fences. Then came the sound that defined a sunny neighborhood morning, the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the bamboo beater. We had to beat the dust out of the thick cotton, a task that required quite a bit of arm strength. As a child, hiding beneath the hanging futons felt like being in a secret, warm tent. When evening came and it was time to sleep, the futons were brought back inside. They had absorbed the heat of the day. Crawling into bed that night, the sheets felt incredibly crisp, and they held a deep, comforting smell that we simply called the scent of the sun. It was a natural, earthy fragrance that promised a night of deep, untroubled sleep. Imagine the sun beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the narrow streets of your old neighborhood. Suddenly, cutting through the quiet evening air, you hear a sad, beautiful brass horn. Poo, 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 poo. It was the local tofu seller, slowly pulling his wooden cart or riding his heavy bicycle loaded with fresh wares. The moment Mother heard that horn, she would grab a ceramic bowl from the kitchen and give you a few coins, telling you to run outside and catch him before he turned the corner. The tofu man wore a thick apron and had hands that were rough but incredibly gentle. He would reach into his deep, water-filled wooden tubs and pull out a perfectly square, pure white block of silken tofu. With a swift, practiced motion, he would slice it, place it into your bowl with a splash of cold water, and hand it down to you. That fresh tofu, eaten just an hour later with grated ginger and soy sauce for dinner, tasted completely different from anything you can buy wrapped in plastic at a modern supermarket. Let us talk about how deeply we cherished music back then. Do you remember the sheer dedication it took to make a mixtape on a cassette recorder? We did not have the luxury of downloading a song instantly. Instead, we sat on the floor next to our heavy radio boomboxes, our fingers nervously hovering over the record and play buttons. We would wait for hours for our favorite song to come on the FM radio. The moment the announcer stopped speaking, you slammed the buttons down, praying the radio host would not talk over the final guitar solo. Cassette tapes were physical objects of devotion. We carefully wrote the track lists on the tiny cardboard inserts with our best handwriting. And if the delicate brown tape ever got chewed up by the machine, it was a tragedy. We would carefully pull the tangled ribbon out and use a hexagonal pencil to manually wind the tape back into the plastic casing. Giving someone a mixtape in the 1980s was not just sharing music, it was giving them a piece of your time, your patience, and your heart. Traveling by train on a long-distance journey meant encountering a very specific, delightful piece of packaging that has completely vanished from the earth. Before the era of hard plastic bottles and vending machines on every corner, station platforms sold hot tea in small, soft, translucent polyethylene containers. They were shaped somewhat like a small teapot. Do you remember the feeling of that warm, slightly squishy plastic in your hands? The lid doubled as a tiny, flimsy cup. Inside the container was a simple tea bag, and the vendor would fill it with boiling water right before handing it to you through the open train window. As the limited express train pulled out of the station, the tea would slowly steep, turning a deep, comforting green. Pouring the hot liquid into the tiny plastic cup while the train rocked back and forth was a delicate balancing act. Sitting back in the velvet seat, sipping that slightly plastic-flavored, earthy green tea while watching the Japanese countryside roll by was the absolute essence of a Showa-era journey. If you walked into any proper Japanese living room in the 1970s, you would instantly notice a very particular decorating trend. It was the era of the lace cover. Mothers and grandmothers felt a deep need to protect and beautify our expensive electronic appliances. The heavy, wooden, boxed cathode ray tube television in the corner did not just sit bare. It was covered with a pristine, intricately embroidered white lace cloth. When it was time to watch a program, the cloth was carefully folded back over the top. But it was not just the television. The piano had a velvet and lace runner. The rotary telephone had its own little knitted doily sitting beneath it. Even the back of the sofa was draped in white lace. It might seem strange to younger generations, but those lace covers were a symbol of pride. They showed that a family respected their belongings, treating these modern machines with a sense of dignity and care. They added a soft, feminine, and deeply domestic touch to the cold plastic and metal of our modernizing world. There was a quiet morning ritual that happened long before most of the family was even awake. Fastened to the wooden pillar next to the front door was a small wooden box with the faded logo of a dairy company like Meiji or Morinaga. In the faint, blue light of dawn, you could hear the soft clinking of glass as the milk delivery man made his rounds. He would leave 2 cold, heavy glass bottles of fresh milk in the wooden box. Getting the milk open was an art form in itself. The bottle was sealed with a thick cardboard cap wrapped in a thin layer of protective plastic. To open it, you had to use a special little tool with a sharp needle on the end to pierce the cardboard and pry it up. If you did not have the tool, you had to use your fingernail, which often resulted in pushing the cap straight down into the milk with a messy splash. Drinking that rich, cream-topped milk directly from the cold, thick glass bottle before heading off to school gave us the energy to face whatever the day had in store for us. Let us reflect on how we preserved our memories before the digital age. I want you to remember the sheer physical weight of a Showa-era family photo album. These were not digital files swiped on a screen. They were heavy, hardcover books bound in faux leather or brightly colored cloth. The pages were thick and coated in a strange, sticky adhesive. You had to carefully peel back the thin sheet of clear plastic, hearing that distinct tearing sound as the static electricity crackled. We would arrange the freshly printed photographs on the sticky page, sometimes cutting them into circles or hearts, and then carefully smooth the plastic sheet back down, trying desperately to push all the air bubbles out to the edges. We would write the dates and funny captions on small pieces of paper and stick them next to the pictures. Those albums smelled faintly of chemical developer and old paper. Turning those heavy pages on a Sunday afternoon, pointing at embarrassing haircuts and forgotten vacations, was how a family told its own history. The center of the universe in a traditional Japanese home was not a sprawling dining table, but the chabudai, the low, round or square wooden table sitting in the middle of the tatami room. Its legs could fold up, meaning the room could transform from a dining area to a bedroom in a matter of minutes. We sat directly on flat zabuton cushions. Because the table was relatively small, our knees would almost touch as the whole family crowded around to eat dinner. During the 1970s and 80s, eating at the chabudai meant watching the legendary 8 o'clock television variety shows. We would eat our bowls of white rice, grilled fish, and miso soup while roaring with laughter at the slapstick comedy of the drifters on the television screen. If someone misbehaved, the ultimate comedic threat from a strict father was to flip the chabudai over, sending plates flying. Sitting so close to the ground, shoulder to shoulder with our siblings and parents, gave us a deep, physical sense of belonging and unbreakable family unity. There was a refined elegance in the way we carried things, a tradition that peaked during the seasonal gift-giving periods of Oseibo in winter and Ochugen in summer. Instead of relying on disposable paper bags, we used the furoshiki, a large, beautiful square of traditional wrapping cloth. When mothers prepared to visit a relative or a teacher, they would take a box of expensive melons or canned crab meat or fancy rice crackers and place it in the center of the fabric. With a few swift, incredibly graceful folding motions, they would tie a perfect, sturdy knot at the top. Suddenly, a simple cardboard box was transformed into a stunning, respectful gift. The furoshiki had beautiful patterns, sometimes deep indigo with white crests, or vibrant reds with floral designs. Walking down the street carrying a delicately wrapped furoshiki parcel made a person look dignified and graceful. It was a beautiful lesson in the idea that the presentation of a gift and the respect it showed was just as important as the gift itself. As summer reached its peak, the neighborhood would transform for the local Matsuri, the summer festival, and with it came a sound that echoed through the humid night air, the loud, chaotic clatter of hundreds of wooden getter sandals hitting the pavement. We would dress in our freshly washed cotton yukata, the fabric stiff with starch. The wooden sandals took some getting used to, the thick fabric thong pinching the space between our toes. But once you learned how to walk in them, you felt a wonderful sense of freedom. We would run toward the glowing paper lanterns of the shrine grounds, the wood of our sandals going clack, clack, clack against the stone steps. We squatted down in our yukatas to play the goldfish scooping game, staring intently at the water, hoping the fragile paper net would not tear. We ate shaved ice flavored with sweet strawberry syrup that stained our tongues bright red. The sound of the wooden getter fading into the distance as families walked home, tired and happy, is the ultimate lullaby of a Japanese summer. Let us take a moment to remember the pure, mouth-watering anticipation of standing outside a family restaurant or department store eatery, staring completely mesmerized at the glass show window. Inside were the sampuru, the incredibly realistic wax and plastic food models. In the Showa era, these displays were an absolute art form. There were plates of shiny, fake spaghetti with a fork magically suspended in mid-air, wrapping the noodles in a perfect twirl. There were glistening hamburger steaks, incredibly detailed sushi, and perfectly golden fried shrimp. But for us kids, the absolute prize was the giant wax parfait, towering with fake whipped cream, bright red cherries, and layered rainbow syrups. We would press our small faces against the glass, leaving smudgy fingerprints, arguing with our siblings over what we were going to order before we even stepped inside the restaurant. Those plastic models were a promise of delicious things to come, a visual menu that sparked our imaginations and made eating out feel like a truly magical event. And now we arrive at our final memory. It is a sound that marked the end of every single childhood adventure. Wherever you were, playing baseball in a dirt lot, climbing trees in a local park, or exploring the narrow alleyways behind the shops, you always listened for the 5 o'clock chime. It was broadcast from the loudspeakers mounted high up on telephone poles in every municipality across Japan. The melody was usually a gentle, slightly melancholic tune, like Going Home or the local town song. When that tinny, echoing music started playing, the entire world seemed to pause. The sky would be turning a deep, bruising purple and orange. We did not need watches to know the day was over. The music was a gentle command from the community, telling us that our mothers were waiting, that dinner was almost ready, and that it was time to return to the safety of our homes. We would grab our dusty bicycles and race each other down the street as the streetlights began to flicker on. It was a daily reminder that we were watched over, cared for, and deeply loved. When we look back at these 20 beautiful fragments of the past, we realize something profound. We do not just miss the physical objects, the rotary phones, the heavy televisions, or the glass milk bottles. What we truly miss is the version of ourselves that existed alongside them. We miss the slow, deliberate pace of life. We miss the patience required to wait for a phone call and the deep, unbroken attention we gave to our families around a small wooden table. The Showa era may have faded into the history books, but it lives on perfectly preserved in our hearts, our habits, and our memories. Thank you so much for taking this warm, nostalgic walk down memory lane with me today. If this video brought a smile to your face or a happy tear to your eye, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to share these beautiful histories together. Now, I have a question for you. Of all the things we talked about today, which one brought back the strongest memory for you? Or is there a different detail from your youth that you still miss every day? Please, write your personal story in the comments below. I promise to read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourselves and never forget the beautiful history that made you who you are today.